Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, welcome back to the show, man.
I know. It's been a little while, but back once again, and got some really interesting stuff to talk about this evening, and some old friends of the show as well. Why don't you go ahead and introduce?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do that real quick. I want to do one little bit of housekeeping. We are into October, which means that it's that time of the year when we will start bugging all you guys for potential donations or just good wishes for the Krispy Kreme Challenge. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's this crazy thing that Aaron and I do. We'll put out some more details, but just to give you a heads up, this time of year till next February, we ask everybody to be generous, and we'll tell you about it coming up. So just giving you a heads up on that.
Anyways, I need to start running.
You need to start running. And
every year I say that. I have to start running about this time.
That's right. So let's introduce our guests. So first off, speaking of running, welcome back to the show. Recent guest and good friend of the show, Keith Townsend, who just recently finished the Chicago Marathon. So congratulations on that, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, guys.
And also joining us, sort of our, for those of you that listened a long time ago, our original podcast mentor, longtime friend of the show, host of Speaking in Tech, Greg Knieriemen. Welcome back to the show, man.
Oh, thanks, Brian. But please, I sure hope you didn't learn anything from me on podcasting.
Well, you got us started. You got us addicted to this thing, so we're always forever grateful. You have a little bit of a job announcement, or at least a job expansion. So why don't you fill us in? You're currently doing some things at HDS, but apparently you are taking on bigger and better things. Yeah,
well, my role's kind of expanded to where I will, in addition to the things I already do, in addition to that, I will be working for Hugh Yoshida, our CTO,
wow.
And doing some things for him. He's been probably overstating it, that he's been an idol of mine, but certainly a mentor to me and somebody I've respected in the industry, and somebody that's genuinely respected across the industry. Definitely legendary, and I'm really fortunate and very lucky to have the opportunity to work for him.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
congratulations.
Yeah, best of luck, and go do some big things. So that's exciting, and you guys are getting very close to. For anybody who doesn't listen to Speaking in Tech, which we highly recommend, you guys are getting very close to potentially replacing and filling some very big shoes. You've been doing this podcast idle. How is all that going?
It's going well. But it looks like a race to the bottom between the contestants. So we're going to put this up to a vote during election week here in the U.S. To coincide. So that will have heavy weight for Ed and I as we decide who's going to be the next podcast co-host for us.
Yeah, exciting stuff. We've got our money on Fred Nix, but who knows who might win that thing. So
well, the problem is that there's some tapes and some recordings of Fred from 10 years ago that are beginning to leak out that may cause some disruption in this process.
He was the shadowy figure on the Access Hollywood bus, so we understand. So
that one unidentified voice.
That's right.
That's right.
So guys, we now live in a world where Bob Dylan won a Nobel Peace Prize for being a lyricist, and VMware and Amazon are playing nice together. What in the world happened today?
Topsy-turvy, man. Topsy-turvy.
I mean, so Keith, you were following this today. Break us down the basics of what got announced today.
So, I was expecting no more than NSX running in AWS. I was not expecting VMware and AWS to go as far as to say that you can run vSphere bare metal in AWS is basically the gist of it. That from NSX to vSAN to vSphere, the whole product suite will be available in bare metal, kind of a bare metal enclave within the AWS infrastructure worldwide.
So is this so basically I think if we boil this down, this was AWS and VMware basically creating a partnership where VMware is going to run a managed service, sort of essentially managed what used to be the vCloud Air cloud service, but now on top of AWS. Greg, what does this mean? I mean, what does this say about VMware?
You know what? My head is spinning from this, and I don't even know where to begin. You know, the curious thing, and what popped out to me is if you look at Frank Denneman's blog and the VMware announcement, you know, they talk about this in terms of a private cloud on AWS infrastructure. If you look at the AWS blog, they don't talk about private or hybrid cloud. They're talking on-premise and AWS, which shouldn't be surprising, right? I mean, AWS doesn't acknowledge that there is any other cloud besides their own.
Right.
So I think it's maybe I'm parsing things a little too much, but I think the terminology is really interesting in the difference in terminology between the two.
You know,
but I don't know if this is cloud though. I mean, this looks more like colo than cloud.
Well, Greg, I think you're hitting on an interesting point. Well, one clarification. It is vCloud Air, and VMware was quick to clarify something to me that vCloud Director is not involved in this. So this is bare VM. So when you're talking about your on-premises solution and integration with what's in AWS, this is vSphere talking to vSphere. So that was a interesting omission. But the other thing that I thought, if you watch the video, they did not use the term hybrid cloud at all. They used the term hybrid throughout both AWS and Pat Gelsinger. Both avoided the term cloud when it came to the combination of the two solutions. It was just hybrid, hybrid, hybrid. And even the engineers, when they got up and spoke, they talked about hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting for me, so to kind of even take it back a level, what did they kind of do here? To me, VMware abstracted away pretty much all hardware, right? You no longer need to buy any compute, any networking, any storage. And of course, they had done that with vCloud Air somewhat before, but it was complementary to on-prem stuff typically. But you don't have to anymore. You could kill data centers now if you really wanted to, because there's probably a confidence level there in AWS that maybe was there, maybe wasn't there before because you were dealing with vCloud or some of these other products. But if you just want to run straight, like you said, Keith, vSphere to vSphere, you could do that. And then you could vMotion your machines from on-prem to the cloud and kill the data center. And then AWS now suddenly has an on-prem story. This, you know, for me, this almost like is a marriage of convenience, right? Each company had one half of and I'm using air quotes here, enterprise hybrid cloud, and it's really expensive to build both pieces, so they got together.
So I guess the obvious question for me, I was at my day job, you know, I work in the enterprise as part of my day thing. And I was chatting with the other architects and I told them about this new service. And we kind of all just shrugged our shoulders and said, okay, where would we use this? And I guess I'll pose the question to you guys. Where exactly would we use this? When we look at AWS from a static workload perspective, that data center, that have those heavy vSphere data center heavy workloads that are too expensive to run in AWS, so we don't. Who does this appeal to exactly?
Yeah, that was the question I sort of had. I mean, I to a certain extent, I look at this and I say, and maybe I'm looking at it too technically, but you know, this is almost exactly the same thing that vCloud Air provided. It was, you know, the VMware stack on sort of dedicated hardware that was allocated to a specific person. VMware managed some aspect of it. You know, there was a lot of it that you didn't see. And they were trying to attract people to basically move, you know, existing workloads. This isn't cloud native. This isn't re-architected stuff. This is, you know, take what you have, move it to somewhere else. And that model, you know, no matter how many times Pat Gelsinger, you know, likes to tell people, like, that model wasn't successful. It wasn't successful to attract customers to move to vCloud Air. It wasn't successful to attract partners to want to resell this thing that competed against their on-premises licenses. It wasn't successful to, you know, it was difficult to run. Like, I agree with you, Keith. I don't know what this delivers at a first glance. And you know, I think there's some bigger strategic things involved, but yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, so go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say, I think VMware sold out completely on this. And I think this is going to be really interesting because, and I keep going back to the terminology they're using here. And if I'm wrong here, Brian and guys, please tell me. This does not look like cloud to me. This is moving on-prem infrastructure to a hosted infrastructure. I think there could be some value in that for customers that want to do that. But I think it's a mistake to call it a private cloud or a cloud at all.
Yeah, it's more like a colo model. I mean, you are paying for piping power kind of thing, right?
And what's interesting, there's already partners that do this extremely well. I can go, if I wanted this type of hand-holding, I can go to Rackspace. Rackspace has peering agreements with AWS, so I can get extremely low latency connectivity to AWS. This whole hosted, paid-for solution managed by some pretty capable folks. So if I really wanted this model where I wanted to get out of managing physical hardware and data centers, I could buy that black box today and have ultra-fast connectivity to AWS. For it to be, from a customer perspective, for it to be interesting to me, you have to, tell me how you're going to fix the problem that still exists, which is integrating my operations with AWS, so that hybrid infrastructure problem of how do I functionally integrate my vSphere software-defined data center with AWS individual services? How do I take NSX and integrate it with AWS's VPC?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And especially if you said that this doesn't include, and I haven't gone through all the details, you said this does not include sort of the, what is it now called? What used to be VCD, the sort of cloud management layer. Is that included or is that not included?
It is not included.
It is not included. They were very specific to say that level of abstraction or complexity, and I think they're positioning that as a level of complexity now versus a added value, that layer of complexity is now stripped out.
And Keith, to answer your question earlier, like what do you get, why this versus Rackspace? I think, yeah, you hit on the one key there of while the services may not be like there isn't an NSX to AWS tie today, there is the ability of there is co-location in the data center and the services are nearby. So, EC2 is nearby, S3 is nearby. And so I think it's almost like a jumping off point. Which is what the AWS angle in all of this is they're getting enterprises to get, on-prem resources, then move them into this kind of holding pen, if you will, this hybrid cloud model or enterprise hybrid cloud, whatever you want to call it. And then from there, potentially jump off over time for some applications.
It's not cloud.
I know. And actually, so I'll ask another question here then of like, okay, why now? Why didn't this happen 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? And I have a version of this, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, for me,
I think.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, I think it was pretty obvious, right? I mean, Pat Gelsinger basically called out AWS as the enemy years ago, and I think if we look at this realistically, we're looking at VMware being very solidly in the infrastructure side of the business and validating that model with their partners and their ecosystem. So there was no way 2 or 3 years ago to make this. They couldn't. I don't think they could talk out of the same, both sides of their mouth then. Now I think in the context of the Dell EMC relationship or merger, acquisition, whatever you want to call it, they're essentially eating their tail now. Because Dell has very clearly doubled down on legacy, and VMware is going around and giving you a path to get off of legacy, but they don't own that infrastructure any longer. So this is curious on so many levels, and I think this is good for VMware. I think it's bad for Dell infrastructure and really good for AWS and for customers kind of dipping their toes, enterprise customers dipping their toes in hosting their infrastructure offsite, but it's not a cloud.
Yeah, if this would have happened 3 or 4 years ago when there was even less understanding of cloud, and people kind of looked at AWS and they understood it from the virtualized infrastructure perspective, I think this would have been an incredibly successful solution. People would have just it was really easy to understand. But I think as organizations start to understand the true value of cloud and have an appreciation for how difficult it is to manage not only private cloud, but that integration between private cloud and public cloud, I think they're looking at this with a raised eyebrow and say, okay, I kind of, set path to say that I'm either going to adopt private cloud or I'm going to stay with my static legacy vSphere type of infrastructure and somehow integrate that into public cloud so I have a hybrid infrastructure. But my desire to run vSphere inside of, or have a vSphere type of operations inside of a public cloud, that desire has passed away. I'm looking more for the integration of the two versus a hosted solution where I can just have that cloud checkbox.
Well,
Brian, what's your thoughts?
Solve the problem. This doesn't solve the problem of migrating your legacy applications to the cloud. It kind of extends the life of legacy applications, I think. Yeah,
I think VMware bought a few more years, and AWS needs a way to kind of continue to grow. And now that they're reporting numbers on AWS, they definitely are getting more of, the microscope lens, looking at them quarter over quarter. And so it created kind of a win-win for both of them in that instance. Brian, what were you going to say earlier?
Yeah, no, I'm a little bit, the more I think about this, the more I think I'm like Greg, the permutations of what all this means. I think the one thing that's jumping out at me, and Greg's hit on this a couple of times, right? I mean, I've worked with AWS a number of times. I used to do some stuff with them when I was at Wikibon. Like, they are incredibly precise. And so them not saying things like hybrid cloud or private cloud, like, there is a very, very distinct reason for that. And I think, if you really think about this, they've been under all sorts of push from people to say, like, well, when are you going to build a private version of AWS? When are you going to put an appliance on there? And that was always out there because it was like, well, you're not going to get the VMware stuff to move. The VMware stuff is where it is, or it's only going to run on VMware and vCloud Air. In essence, VMware just said, like, oh, don't worry, let me fix that problem for you. I'm going to open a fast lane for people that were on-prem to potentially come to you. And as best I can tell, AWS doesn't have to do anything in this. They're basically just buying advertising right next to all those VMware people that are going like, oh, once I put it into VMware on AWS, then all of a sudden, look at all these beautiful AWS ads. They just happen to be called AWS Lambda, AWS Kinesis, AWS cool features that I might want to use someday. And oh, by the way, I'm now really close to them. I don't have to worry about network latency. I don't have to worry about that complex NSX stuff to set up. I'm right next to it. I live right next door to that thing now. Like, this thing is brilliant. And you're right, Aaron. VMware bought themselves a couple of years, but this is a deal that feels very, very one-sided to me.
Well, and the other thing I would add is there's also I think a bigger threat here that we haven't really talked about either. It's not just VMware, Dell, AWS. I think one of the big reasons this all happened was this validates Azure and Azure Stack coming next year as a valid threat to both of them.
Bingo.
Yeah,
yep. Exactly. Yeah. I was just going to hit on that this doesn't solve the problem that I want cloud APIs in my data inside of my data center that I could operate and control, whether that's a hosted data center or a on-premises data center. The fact that I want to build applications, have object-based storage, have APIs and fabric type of or serverless compute. I don't have those things under my own domain in this solution. Azure Stack, you have that in Azure Stack. I can have a box that I can extend my application from my on-premises solution to a off-prem solution. It doesn't even have to be a Azure or official Azure public data center. I just have that ability and that new operating model. I think one of the challenges that customers will run into in the VMware and AWS model is that we end up parking static workloads or stagnant workloads in this, where we have this maintenance, like this IBM type maintenance that we just can't kill. These applications that we don't want to invest the money to refactor them, but the maintenance of the AWS hosting service charges and the VMware licenses are killing me year after year, but I'm just stuck.
Yeah. You know, it's going to be kind of interesting to see, this would be sort of funny, is to see Andy Jassy roll out on stage in November at AWS reInvent and go, yeah, one of the things that we're implementing is the VAAI storage APIs and the Vasa APIs in EBS, and it's one half the price of what VMware charges on AWS. And go, I'm just going to start picking away at your thing. So
and it also real quick too, along the lines too, it picks away at not just old legacy applications, but old legacy hardware.
Oh yeah,
right. There's a lot of hardware refresh, cycles coming up, and there always is. Well, guess what? You now have an option of, I don't want to buy another round of servers for my data center. I'm going to just move all of those VMs, which they've always had. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think anyone ever took vCloud Air serious. So this gives probably a confidence level in the market that probably wasn't there before, and really legitimizes this as a new potential option. So it's disruptive to existing service providers. It's disruptive to hardware vendors. It's disruptive to Azure. I mean, it kind of, there's a lot of nuances here.
Yeah,
it's disruptive to Dell. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the logic. If you're outside of VMware and maybe outside of EMC, but in that, part of that Dell leadership team, what are they thinking? I don't know what the upside is for Dell here, other than to extend some life out of VMware.
Well, it's interesting, and we all like to, because we've all worked for vendors and we've all done marketing stuff. We all like to look at nuanced things. I don't know if any of you guys picked this up. Our friend Chad Sakich had a blog post here a few weeks ago where he sort of said, like, yeah, you guys all knew me for being a VMware guy, but I'm my world is now bigger. I'm expanding beyond VMware. And it felt very much like Chad was distancing himself from VMware. And we all know that, as much as Chad does some independent stuff, he speaks very much from, the place of his employer. It feels like this decision, I don't know if Pat was trying to make a statement to Michael Dell about, I don't care about your hardware and I don't care about your Azure relationships, but boy, it really feels like the Dell EMC thing is very much distancing itself from wherever VMware thinks it's going to go.
Well, and here's another one for you. Not just because this really does kind of, in my mind, kills off vCloud Air, but VirtuStream, remember them? That's $1 billion. You might as well just light on fire.
Well, I would, you know what, Aaron, I'll respectfully disagree with you, and I'm probably in this awkward position of defending VirtuStream. But if you look at what VirtuStream is doing, and I'll put my Hitachi hat on, what we do with Axia, is that they're building application specific, or let's be clear here, SAP HANA specific for the cloud, and I think there's huge value in providing SAP HANA in a cloud environment. So
yeah, I would agree.
That's fair.
I
think that one thing
I was thinking in a VMware service provider context, but in an SAP context, absolutely, I agree with you.
Well,
but VMware service providers as a whole, an entire industry got disrupted because VMware said this is our preferred partner going forward.
Yeah, don't forget though, AWS has been making some pretty good leeway into SAP HANA. They just announced a couple of months ago a 4 terabyte scale up SAP HANA workload, which was pretty impressive, seeing that I don't even think VMware is certified for anything beyond 2 terabytes yet. So that virtual stream and VMware relationship it got to be strained, because if I'm a customer and I have to choose between VirtuStream, which is hosted in a different data center, and AWS's SAP, which is hosted right next door to my existing vSphere hosted environment, which do I choose? What level of service or availability that is VirtuStream giving me that I can't get from AWS? And AWS allows me to consume SAP licenses by the drink, which I don't know if VirtuStream allows.
Well, Keith, I would argue that you'd be an absolute fool to host SAP HANA inside of a virtual machine. And I think it's the Achilles heel that VMware has with that SAP HANA relationship. All the best practices I've read, so that should be on bare metal, and it's a low latency application, and that's really critically important. And
So for my VMware sales guy, Greg said that I didn't. Just as a reinforcement to the argument that we've been having.
Let me ask you guys this, though, to kind of flip it over to a different way, because we hadn't talked about it all that much. We've talked it from a very VMware-centric point of view. What does all of this say about AWS? Because I tend to agree with Brian, and it seems the general consensus of a little bit of why did VMware do this? But I'm going to say, why did AWS do this? I mean, I can see an upside and I can see a downside. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts here.
Yeah, enterprises are not getting AWS. Large enterprises just don't get it.
That's right.
I don't mind saying that. I'll throw up my hands, and I don't know how to integrate. It's not just a technology problem. I don't know how to integrate AWS operations into my operations. It's going to be those satellite applications. Some of it's going to be digital transformation and high value stuff, but the data gravity of my data center is going to run in VMware, and I don't know how to integrate operationally AWS into my existing data center, and I think AWS has seen that resistance and those challenges.
So let me ask you this then, and this is more of a theoretical. Okay, let's say a data center moves a bunch of VMs into this. They run for a long period of time. This is an agile, this is steady state legacy applications that, you put them there and they just run. So then me as a customer, I have to buy a VMware license for all of that, and I have to pay for AWS. So I'm really double dipping there. I don't know. I struggle with, now I'm paying twice when before I was paying once. But I guess you have an offset of pay by the drink versus, capital hardware. But still,
I think that's the magic here, right? Is to make this work, the costs have got to align and make sense. And I think if there's any place where this does fall apart, it's going to be on cost. And I think this is going to be particularly challenging when you add all that up. And you think people complain about, the VMware tax, they're paying now. Imagine what that is, when you get the AWS tax on top of it.
Yeah.
Well, what about
AWS gets to say they have revenue on enterprise VMs at that point, and they get to continue to grow their enterprise business. So that's what they get out of it.
So if AWS is charging the customer for bare metal resources, so this could be an advantage from a customer perspective. All that fancy power management that I don't use in my data center, what if I'm paying for bare metal by the drink, and overnight I collapse my entire environment down by 50%, and now I'm getting real cost savings from the power management. I'm not just getting the power cost savings that VMware tries to promote with power management, but I'm getting tangible cost reduction from my hosted data center provider because I'm using the bare metal resources, that infrastructure, 50% less during down periods, and I'm getting true elastic compute as part of my VMware infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I think all those are valid. I think AWS has been making those claims for a while. If you get rid of your data centers, you get rid of licensing costs, power costs, the data center depreciation, all these sort of things. I think the biggest thing for VMware for AWS, and the reason they did this is they now got, so if you think about AWS, their biggest concerns are basically, how do I get Microsoft workloads? How do I get Oracle workloads? Or how do I get VMware workloads into my cloud? Because I've got a pretty good capture on developers. Developers know me, developers like AWS, but it's that, it's that $400 billion IT thing that they're looking for. And what they did today was they knocked down one of the three major pillars to get VMware to say, you know what, for years we've said AWS is bad. We just convinced them to say AWS is good. And that's all they needed was they just needed that foot in the door to say, okay, when my sales rep goes in there and he's sitting in a room and the VMware admin's there, he can go, hey, you know what? They endorse me now. right? I mean, that's in essence what it was, and it doesn't cost them a thing, right? They're not trying to sell it. They don't have to manage it.
Yeah, and the beauty of it, VMware is going to do all the sales of it.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, who knows? They may not, VMware may never sell any of this stuff, but it very well may get a whole bunch of VMware admins to go, hey, I should install that plugin, that AWS plugin in my vCenter and start seeing what else is out there. Like I think that's what this thing was for them. It was a big marketing opportunity to get an endorsement.
And if it's real, is the IP? Because I have to imagine AWS has to do an awful lot of engineering to make this work, because their network, their infrastructure isn't set up for these types of workloads. Can they use it again in let's say a VMware type frenemy or competitor in Nutanix, and a Nutanix Prism runs on a AWS enclave?
Oh,
yeah, that's going to be the next. That's going to be the next shoe that falls. I think, as I think you're going to see Nutanix kind of similar deal.
And just the operations in general, the operations all of this blows my mind, because everyone knows AWS infrastructure, Google infrastructure, they kind of operate at scale with automation and APIs. Well, if I put vSphere, NSX, and vSAN in a bucket, those terms usually are never their strong points, right? And so how are you going to just operate and maintain the stuff? Like that's probably a good bit of research and development right there too.
Well, and if you think about it, if they can get this right, and even if the VMware version of it never happens, there's still a huge amount of business, just day-to-day business, that is managed services and colo. And if they can open that up under, basically, like Amazon, the company, has no problem getting into any business they think they can make money in, right? I mean, shoot, they're now trying to get into, building physical grocery stores, and people would go like, oh, wait a second, you're not a brick and mortar. Like, they don't care, right? They're into saying, look, I can make money. So you have this, dwindling hosted and managed services business that people can't do individually. But if you could consolidate all that under one person who has, 200 data centers around the world and has this brand, like, they may just start picking up Rackspace's old business, and they, which was $4 billion or $2 billion a year, and they may pick up, a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on like that. That may be the thinking of doing this little thing from an engineering perspective that could blossom into a lot of other stuff.
Brian, I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the companies that's going to feel the biggest impact from this, if there's going to be any near-term impact, it's going to be Rackspace.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Rackspace, possibly SoftLayer, all the big VMware hosting shops.
Well, I think this is a clear loss for Rackspace. Remember when they pulled back from OpenStack, they doubled down on hosted vSphere. And because that was their big money maker, and this is an affront to that, most definitely.
Yeah.
And it amazes me how VMware can continually make changes to how they operate that is disruptive to their ecosystem partners. And let me be very clear here. This whole podcast, I'm speaking just for myself. I'm not speaking for my company. I got to make that real clear. But this seems very disruptive to their partner ecosystem. And it is that's what makes it so curious, right? And it really feels like Dell EMC is eating its tail on so many levels, and I just can't imagine what the Dell leadership is thinking about here about what's in their best long-term interest.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Don't they have like a big event coming up here in a couple of weeks or something like that? The Dell guys.
Yeah, next week is Dell EMC World. I'll be there, and if there's a Q&A with Michael Dell, I'll certainly ask him.
And Greg, I'm sure you'll be able to pause podcast idle and get Chad to come back on, and he'll tell you, Greg, guys, come on now, you're overreacting.
Hold on a minute.
Hold on, guys. You look at the
I'm pretty sure Chad's not coming back on again, but that's just a guess.
Well, listen, guys. I think we've looked at this from enough angles. I think it's still new, and we'll see what sort of fleshes out. But appreciate all of you, throwing out some questions, giving us some ideas and opinions and stuff. Where can people find all the good things that you're doing and your works and your podcasts and all that stuff, Greg?
So, as I hope most people know, Speaking in Tech is published on the Register every Wednesday morning. It's also on the Speaking in Tech website. And you can follow me on Twitter at Knieriemen.
What about you, Keith?
And you can follow me on Twitter at CTOAdvisor. The blog and the podcast, you can find it on the CTOAdvisor.com.
Excellent. Well, listen, Greg, congratulations on the new role. Best of luck in that. Guys, if we don't get a chance to talk to you again before all these holidays come along, best of holidays to you and your family. Aaron, you want to wrap it up for us, take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Keith, Greg, thank you very much for your time this weekend. So on behalf of Brian and myself, thank you very much for listening this week, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.